Towson by. It means baseball talk. We've dabbled in a little post-Caps TJ Oshie signing and waiting around on the Ravens, but it's been a lot of baseball around here. This guy also does a lot of baseball out at Bleacher Report. He is a bat flip proponent and a writer, MLB lead writer at Bleacher Report. We welcome back one of our defending champions and returning guests. Zach Reimer joins us here. You can find him out on Twitter at Zach, ZACHRYMER. Zach Reimer, welcome back. Certainly not good circumstances unless you're facing the Orioles as a hitter lately. The Orioles are in quite a mess here, quite a soup over the next few weeks leading up to the trading deadline because I've said this, I don't think they can win the World Series with this kind of pitching, Zach.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch what's happening to them this year because typically their starting pitching is never that great in any given year, but they always kind of downplay it by playing really good defense, hitting a lot of home runs, and their bullpen just you get through 6 innings, you just turn it over to the bullpen, and things were fine from there. That formula has essentially just kind of run its course, it seems, this year. It's just the bullpen isn't as deep, especially with Britton being hurt for pretty much the entire year. Offense has been good, but not great. Defensively, seems like they're not quite the same either. So it just goes to show, I think, in retrospect, how small their margin for error was with that formula that they've had for several years now, where they've had just the starting pitching has been just good enough, and everything else was really great.
Well, I mean, they got rid of Gallardo, right? I mean, it's not like you want him back or whatever, but, I mean, there was no safety net here other than Mike Wright and Tyler Wilson, and I haven't seen anything beyond that. I mean, they pulled Alec Asher out for a couple of starts, failed Phillies guy and a prospect, but there is nothing. I mean, the real indictment here on the organization is how bereft of talent it is to bring up anyone, and more than that, we're going to see that heading up on the trading deadline, that if they actually are buyers, because they're going to squeeze themselves into thinking, well, we're within 4 games of the second wild card, or whatever it will be, they have nothing to deal out to bring anything. I mean, the bottom part of the organization here is barren, and that should be the disturbing part in a year where they're already not going to win the World Series. They're 18 months up on losing Jones, Machado, Britton, Brock, and Showalter and Duquette. As a fan, as a guy that does radio here every day, Zach, my question is real simple. What's the plan around here? I mean, you're really going to win the World Series this year or next year? Do you really believe that right now? Because if you do, you're kind of disillusioned in my mind.
Yeah, this is kind of the downside to having a consistent contender over, 5 years now? More than 5 years? You start to lose out on those low draft picks. Your bonus pool, both on the draft and the international market, is not as large. These things kind of work against stocking up on your farm system, and over a long enough period of time, it's going to start to show.
Well, the other part of that is when you're in the race, you tend to be the team dealing your Zach Davies for their Gerardo Parra, or your Eduardo Rodriguez for their Andrew Miller, or your Jake Arrieta, right, for their Feldmans, right? And then you add 5 years into that, and anything you did have that you could be using, and then there's decisions to let Wei and Chen roll out and to give Miguel Gonzalez away, just throw him out onto the scrap heap. I mean, they've made some poor decisions amongst all this as well.
Yeah, well, it's easy to look back and say they're poor decisions in retrospect, but at the time, you're trying to win games, and, like the Rodriguez for Andrew Miller trade, they had a really good team in 2014, and Andrew Miller was really good for them. That was a World Series caliber team. It just didn't happen. So I do think you're generally right, though, that the World Series window, I mean, they're an American League team. You can't really close the contention window on them just yet because the American League is kind of a mess. But the World Series contention window, yeah, it does seem like it has shut. But you can't look back and say, like, oh, well, all those trades were terrible because they didn't win the World Series. That's some 2020 hindsight stuff going on. It just didn't work out. So I guess I'm of the more forgiving variety because I try to understand what teams are going for at any given time. But what will really be interesting going forward now is, given that where the Orioles are, and they have quite a few talented players, even despite the fact that their World Series contention window seems to be closed, whether or not they decide to rebuild either this summer, which I doubt it, or possibly this winter or next summer. So that's kind of how teams work now. They're either going for it or they're just completely just taking their hands off the controls, backing up, rebuilding, and going for it later. So the Orioles are at a point now where they need to start thinking about that, and I wonder when they'll do it.
Yeah, it's been a little while since they've had to make these kinds of considerations, but I think Machado really presses the issue here in regard to who's going to give him $300 million 16 months from now. Because, I mean, Zach, we're at the point now where we got about 800 at-bats left in Manny Machado. What are those 800 at-bats worth to the Orioles to relinquish them in regard to a trade? And I think the one thing that this organization was paralyzed by at this point is that he's hitting 225. You know, like that was something that was not on the radar at all for them, was a completely healthy and uniquely not very productive version of Manny Machado, at least offensively.
Yeah, if you're going to trade a guy like that, you're going to trade him for as much as you can possibly get for him, because, you know, when he's right, he's among the best superstars in the entire game. So I don't think the clock is ticking on that just yet in terms of a trade. I will say, though, like it's kind of weird how not productive he's been this year, because, you know, the numbers are bad, but, you know, it's not like he's striking out too much. When he does hit the ball, he's hitting it really hard. So I look at this first half that he's had as more kind of a fluke than any kind of real red flag, because generally speaking, his skills are intact. So I wouldn't worry about him, whether or not it's as a guy the Orioles want to sign long-term. I kind of have my doubts about that, or as potentially a future trade chip.
You know, but that's fascinating. You would call it a fluke because, like, I would think in the trade market, you would be right. In the trade market, he would get as much back as he would have ever have gotten. No one's going to look at him and say, well, he's hit 228, he's diminished, and seeing the way he fields the ball and seeing that you're trying to win this year and next year, that's why you would deal. You know, no one thought Chris Sale couldn't pitch. They just got a haul for him and took advantage of that moment. The Orioles would never do that. I mean, I don't think that they would deal him just because of the guy that owns the team, but I think in other places, this would have to be something seriously considered when you look down and see that 36 of your starts this year have ERAs of 6.5 or greater, and that they almost set a 100-year mark for ineptitude as far as starting pitching goes. You know, I don't know that that's going to improve greatly if you've watched Gausman make 16 starts and you've watched Jimenez and Tillman make a dozen starts this year.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to the rebuild idea. I mean, if they do it, trading Machado is going to be a central part of that. And I highly doubt that's going to happen in the near future. If that's going to happen, it'll probably be next summer, and only if they're really out of it. So to a certain extent, we're talking about a pretty distant hypothetical here. But, you know, we've been talking about, it is something you have to start thinking about, given how sideways this season has gone and given the general situation of the team. So there it is.
Zach Reimer joining us here from Bleacher Report. He's the MLB lead writer there. You can follow his journey out at Bleacher Report as well as at Zach Reimer, and that's spelled R-Y-M-E-R, and Zach with an H as well on Bleacher Report. You know, Zach, I guess around the sport the next 5-6 weeks, the conversation that everyone I have about baseball, not just the Orioles, will be the trading deadline. And we make a big deal about it, and obviously prospects go back and forth. It's not as trade-centric and big names on the marketplace lately as it used to be maybe 10 or 15 years ago, but it still is considered some sort of magic elixir and also a real barometer as to whether you're in it this year to win it or you are going to fold up and bring in more prospects and shed some salary and shed some contracts that may be expiring one way or another. I find that the teams that are very dramatic about it, I kind of like that. I mean, the Yankees were dramatic last summer about that. It's worked out okay for them. I mean, I would say the same thing for several other teams that have been involved at trading deadline deals to have comebacks. Milwaukee, Houston, a lot of these teams that have, Colorado dealing off Tulowitzki amongst others. So, you know, things have happened here at the trading deadline that makes it cyclical, but I always find it the most fascinating part of the summer to see what the organization's really thinking short-term and long-term.
Yeah, I think if recent history has taught us anything, is that whether you're a buyer or a seller, there is tremendous upside in just being pragmatic at the deadline. Realize when you're out of it and sell. realize when you're in it, and buy. It's really is that simple, but it seems like a lot of teams do struggle with that, and the ones that don't, like the Yankees last year, or like you said, the Brewers, they benefit from it. So that'll be the interesting question this year, especially given that it's funny because the National League is where all the sellers are. It's a league of haves and have-nots, but the teams that are in position to sell are teams like the Braves and the Phillies, where they've been rebuilding for several years. So it's not like they have an excess amount of stars they can shed. The really interesting teams that are in the American League are teams that could go either way, but maybe will not be willing to sell because of how competitive the American League is. You're talking about teams like the Royals who got off to a really slow start and have a ton of trade chips, but are now playing pretty well. The same goes for the Rays. The same goes for the Blue Jays. And the Rangers have Yu Darvish, but they might not be willing to sell him either. So that's where the action is. The American League, and I think those four teams in particular, it'll be interesting to see where they come down on the pragmatic flip of the coin.
Zach, the frightening part of being an Orioles fan, and I've talked to people in Toronto this week about it as well because the Orioles are playing them and they're playing Tampa this weekend, is that the haves and the have-nots, we lived through a whole era of that, man. Yankees and Red Sox mania, and that's the game of the week on ESPN and MLB, and it makes you sick as an Oriole fan, but it's also they have the most resources. They've used their resources wisely. The Yankees went through their shedding of their snakeskin the last few years and have come out at the other side. It really looks like these two franchises are about to make some moves here that should frighten any Orioles, Blue Jays, or Rays fan.
Yeah, and I think coming into the year, you knew the Red Sox were going to be good, but maybe it was too soon to project the Yankees to contend after they had literally just started what was, I think, an overdue rebuild the past summer. But now you're looking at a situation where you look at the Yankees and the Red Sox. Not only are they good, but they're going to be good for the long haul. They're two teams with young cores of star players. So if the Rays are kind of the underdog here because they're kind of in a similar position. But if you're the Orioles or you're the Blue Jays, you're kind of built around older cores with rapidly shutting contention windows. That should worry you because to get back in the race, you need to basically fight fire with fire. And like we were talking about before, the way to do that in this day and age is just to completely tear it down and rebuild anew. So that's an interesting situation in the American League East for sure.
Fun teams competing at this point. I mean, Houston aside, they're like at another level right now, and we could talk about them, and it is a shock. But Minnesota, Milwaukee, Colorado, Arizona, I mean, there really is some fresh blood here. And meantime, teams like Cleveland and Chicago really are on the scuffle right now trying to figure this thing out. I mean, the playoffs started tomorrow morning. The Cubs wouldn't be in it.
Yeah, it's what's this, in the AL Central especially. That's just what's weird going on there because I think Cleveland was the heavy favorite coming into the year and deservedly so. And to be fair, they were getting pretty hot for a while there, and the Twins seemed to be cooling down. So of course, what happened this past weekend is that the Twins swept the Indians and retook control of the AL Central. I got to be honest, I have no idea how to project that race at this point. It's just been strange, and the Indians, while they're great on paper, there is kind of that World Series hangover vibe there. And the same thing is going on with the Cubs. Through the first 2 months of the year, I was of the mind to just be patient with them, kind of wait for them to get their act together. Now I'm not so sure anymore. We're almost 3 months into the year, and it's just been, one step forward, two steps back for them pretty much the entire season. The bright side is that, for both the Indians and the Cubs, neither of those divisions is running away from them. But, it goes to show, like, if a team can be great on paper, but how often does it happen where just reality intervenes and suddenly they're not so great? That's what we're seeing here, and there's really no way to look back and say, well, we should have known. These things happen, so it's weird like that.
Yeah, pitching's everything, and obviously when it starts to falter as it has in Cleveland, as it is in Chicago, it's tough to survive that. Hey, man, always great to have you on, talk a little baseball with you. Tell me what you do out at Bleacher Report other than just sit around and watch a lot of baseball, Zach.
Actually, I sit around and watch a lot of baseball, so yeah.
Well, hey, man, that's good. It's a good gig. We can get it, right? I mean, I sit around and talk about sports here. It's, served me well for 26 years so far. I've been fooling them all along. We're going to send everybody out to follow you at Bleach Report as well as at Zach Reimer out on Twitter. Great having you on, pal.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You got it. Zach Reimer joining us here from the other coast. You can find me out in the Bahia Toyota Audio Vault anywhere the internet is served for everything we do here. You can listen when you want, where you want, how you want. Just download the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear. Morning newspaper ships to your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. That's powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it is $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. And there's one right around the corner. If you want a little inspiration, go to Planet of Triumphs. I guarantee you some great stories there as well. Our tech service brings you breaking news, which lately is the Norfolk Shuttle. We hope there's no Ravens breaking news that isn't signing another Jeremy Maclin at this point, but we'll get back to plenty of Ravens talk around here in the coming weeks. We're going to be going around to all 32 camps, but breaking news is mainly Oriole baseball right now, and that's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, driving you home, getting you ready for the weekend with the SSV on WNST. I have been writing the Peter Principles, or just editing them, actually. I wrote them all 4 years ago. Chapter 8 will be released later on this week out on the website. We'll also get that out onto our social media at Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. And, of course, we're always streaming here on Facebook Live as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports.